I think currently we've got a perfect storm, so there's a number of factors that are contributing and really culminating together. So the first is that we have the Fair Work Ombudsman, which has been provided with greater legislative powers and is also greater funding. So the Fair Work Ombudsman is getting more actively involved in pursuing particular employees and has targeted particular industries. So fast food, restaurant, catering, cleaning are areas which traditionally there has been a feeling that employees may be more vulnerable and therefore exposed to risk of underpayment. So the Fair Work Ombudsman has targeted those industries and committed a lot of resources. Coming out of that, we've seen some really high profile underpayment cases. So we've had the George Calambouros Maid Group with a $7.8 million underpayment. We've had Rockpool and many others within the same vein. So they've been very, very successful, and that of itself has created greater media attention because, you know, we all remember seeing George Calambouros on the 7:30 report crying because of his underpayments, and so that of itself has fed the media frenzy, and that's in turn led to more people questioning whether my employer is paying me. Now, our industrial relations system is particularly complex. So in the last 5 years, we've seen 7-Eleven, probably one of the largest underpayment cases in history at 160 million. That dwarfs into comparison to the latest Woolworths case, which was 300 million. We've also got Qantas, the ABC, admitting to underpaying wages. So if, you know, Woolworths, Qantas, the Commonwealth Bank, if these sorts of employers can't get it right, then what chance do small to medium-sized employers have? So the system is just far too complex, it's far too onerous, and it's too easy to make mistakes. And while unions have started to refer to underpayments as wage theft, the unlawful kind of retaining of wages which should have been paid to others, in reality, most employers don't intend to do it. Most employers do it by inadvertence or error because of complexity and lack of understanding of the system. But employers are starting to take it more seriously, and you've started to see a lot more employers self-reporting. So some of the high-profile cases we see at the moment, it's not because someone else has found out, it's because they've self-reported themselves and they've made the admission as part of the process of rectifying underpayment. So when you have, you know, a $300 million underpayment, it's pretty hard to keep that in-house. So you have to disclose, and that of itself has kind of, you know, fueled the feeding frenzy. The best way to avoid an underpayment is to really take some proactive steps. So the things that we shouldn't do is what we have always done, because what we have always done may be an inadvertent underpayment. So it's important that employers proactively take steps to ensure that we are currently paying our employees all their minimum legal entitlements. So there's a number of things that we can do in that regard. We can undertake audits of our payroll records, either internal or external. I would ordinarily recommend an external audit, because if your internal auditors are the same people who are doing the payroll, they won't be able to identify the errors that they themselves have made. So an external audit is a good double checking process. The second issue is just to continually review our employment contracts and make sure that they are up to date at all times. The third is to educate. So educate all our key HR people, our payroll staff and key managers to make sure that they are aware of their employment obligations, and that we should take some active steps, particularly around those employees that we call salaried. So lots of organisations have salaried staff, they pay a salary to, they don't record hours, and they don't calculate any overtime payments. A lot of those salaried staff are really covered by an award, and that could be creating a very, very significant risk of underpayment, and that should be avoided if at all possible. If an employer makes a mistake, it's important that they act quickly to resolve it. So the first thing they need to do is have some very clear communication with the employee affected. So if the employee is left in a void and a vacuum, then it's more likely that they'll go external and seek to formalise a complaint. Much better to try and resolve it in-house if at all possible. So the first point is to communicate with the employee, tell them exactly what you're doing, and that would ordinarily involve, we will review the payroll records, we will do a recalculation, and if there is any underpayment, then we will communicate that to you, or if there's not an underpayment, we'll communicate that to you, but if there is, then we will pay it as quickly as possible. Flowing out of that though, it's important that while you deal with that individual, you have to determine whether the error that was made was something that was specific to him or her, or whether it's a systemic problem. And if it's a systemic problem, then you may need to go back and recalculate wages for a number of employees and to fix the problems within the system. It's also incumbent upon all employers to self-report serious and significant breaches to the Fair Work Ombudsman, and that would be something that we would always recommend. It's important to get it right for three reasons. The first and probably the most obvious is there's a significant financial risk in getting it wrong. So we've seen some significant back pay claims in the millions of dollars, and very few organisations can sustain that. So it could become financially crippling for an organisation. And that's just the back pay claims. In addition to that, the other financial aspects are potential penalties. So both companies and individuals concerned in the breaches can be fined. There are also contrition payments. So George Calambouris was required to pay a $200,000 contrition payment, as well as participate in media and advertising campaigns around the correct payment of wages. But then there's also the audit process and the administration involved in going back, recreating wages over a number of years, paying them and processing, and that in itself can run into the millions of dollars depending upon the size and extent. The second is the reputational risk to your organisation, and we've seen quite significant press campaigns run against high-profile organisations which have had the ability to impact upon not only the organisation but also the employees that are employed with it. So again, we're talking about George because he's probably the most high profile. When he came out in the 730 report, he really stressed not to punish his staff for what he or his company had done. So by people not going to the press club or his other restaurants, it would indirectly impact directly on the staff, those that these people would think they were supporting. So the reputational risk is important because it can result in loss of business. And the third area, and probably the one which is less focused on, is the impact on your employees and your team members. So it's a huge breach of trust not to pay your employees correctly, because they come to work every day expecting to be paid what they're legally entitled to. And in failing to make those payments, you really undermine the trust and confidence that's important in that relationship. It can be quite demoralising, and in the long term can affect your ability to attract and retain great people, and that's very, very significant.